All right. Hello, everybody. We're back. I'm here with my grandmother today. I'll let you introduce yourself. What's your name?
My name is Barbara Ott. Once upon a time, Barbara Pierce.
All right. Where are you from?
Where am I from? I actually have lived in California all my life except for 6 months. My entire family are natives to California except me. And I was born in Missouri when my parents moved back there when before I was born, and they lived there for 6 months. And then we came back to California. And then we lived in St. Helena, California, and where my father worked in a gypsum mine there. And uh, we then, things happened. My mother took us children, three at that time, and moved to North Oakland, where I lived until I was, I think, 12. Then we went to Hayward. We started like moving to the suburbs and went to Hayward, California. Ended up in Dublin, California. I moved back to East Oakland when I got married. And then in the 70s, we decided to go live off the land in a place called Berry Creek. And now I live in a small farm community called Gridley, California.
Okay. And out of those places, do you think you have a favorite one?
Well, if when you say home, I always think of that train of living places.
Mm-hmm.
But probably home was Berry Creek. I lived there the longest ever I lived anywhere. I lived there for 36 years.
Yeah. And what would you describe it like living out there?
Um, Work, beauty, hard times, and joy.
Yeah. So you went to live off the land, and how did that go for you?
um, we had a lot to learn. So, your granddad had never hunted in his life, and he decided he had to try to hunt. That was a fun situation the first time he killed a deer. He never killed another deer.
Yeah.
But we did raise, we were not vegetarian, so along with our vegetable garden, we did raise goats. And as some people get kind of upset by this comment, but the little male goats we would castrate, and when they got about 4 months old, we would butcher them and eat them. And your grandfather also did hunt a few times squirrels. And so there was a period of time where we were pretty dependent on squirrel meat, you know. And then it's hard to keep it all straight because, in and out life is up and down. Anyway, we discovered we really needed to have an income. We were trying to do this without having jobs, and that didn't work. So he ended up getting a job, and that's when we could then afford to raise our own meat, like rabbits, goats, things of that nature, and
Mm-hmm.
provide our own milk and all of that.
Yeah. The squirrel meat, what is squirrel meat like?
It's been a long time. I Because I'd never had anything like that. I usually stewed it, and so therefore you have like a mixture of flavors, and when that's what you have, you eat it. So I'm not dying to go around and find squirrel meat to eat it again. Um, but when I go to Indian restaurants, I almost always, if they have goat, I will almost always order goat. I do like goat meat
That
really
stuck
well.
with you? Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And what's your education and job history like?
You're talking to someone a lot of years. I could keep going for a long time.
Go for it.
Um, I, of course, not graduated, but graduated high school in Pleasanton, California. Before it was a huge suburban area, it was still a farm town. Now it's a massive suburb. Um, in my family, girls were not encouraged to go to college. And I didn't at first. I did a few classes at Chabot College in Hayward, but I was kind of a wanderer and kind of not focused. And then when I got married at 19 and we moved to East Oakland, I went to Laney College. I dropped out of that. And then after my kids were grown, I went back to Butte College here in this area, and then on to Chico State and got a degree in instructional technology, a communications degree. And then I knew I wasn't going to be going to the Silicon Valley to be doing what that job had a base for. And I talked to an instructor and they said, you should become a teacher. And I laughed my head off because at that time I didn't believe in compulsory education. I had homeschooled my kids and anyway, philosophical stuff. And I went ahead and got a teaching degree, so I have a couple of years post-grad.
Okay. And from there, you ended up working as a teacher?
I did. I worked for 1 year as it was a time when the population of children was down, so the schools were down and not hiring full-time teachers at that time. And so I did a lot of what's called long-term subbing. Got a pretty good, a lot of people wanting me to work for them. And then I discovered, after a year in a fairly low-income school with kids with just a lot of problems, and I knew that the integration of music and art in a curriculum would make a world of difference, and so I had some of those skills. So I brought all of that with me on the side. The schools back then were not as strict as they are now with following certain standards all the time. You had standards, but it was in a different flow. You had more freedom to teach. And then I discovered, after that year, seeing a third grader throw a desk across the room, that there's got to be solutions for this, other than punishment. And I discovered this education process called Waldorf education, which at that time was mainly in the private sector. And schools were starting to have alternatives, and I sent myself to the Rudolph Steiner College in Fair Oaks, California, and took a public school, a Waldorf education for public school teachers session in the summer, and went, this is it. I don't want to go back to the other at all. And it turned out, I didn't know this, but it turned out that in Chico there was a public Waldorf school. And so I was teaching special ed, not special ed, but gifted education, at that time part-time, and was given a lot of freedom to do thematic teaching with arts and music within that. And so I went and knocked on the Waldorf school door and said, hey, these are my hours. I'll sub for you any day of the week. And they had a teacher go through kind of a meltdown. And so they hired me till the end of the year with the third grade. And I took boldly the very little I knew about Waldorf, which you don't get much in one summer in that type of education, but I was bold and went, hey, I know how to do this. And then they hired me the next year, and I worked there for 12 years as a Waldorf teacher in a public sector.
Okay. And you're now retired, but you're still currently involved with volunteering and whatnot. Could you tell us about that?
I've always, forever and ever, felt it was really important to do community service, to give back what you can to other people. And so I felt my teaching was exactly that, was a type of community service. And so when I retired, I knew that I wanted to continue doing whatever that meant. And so when we life changed with our situation in the mountains, which was a non-traditional, we did not have equity in the place that we lived, but we were on the deed and in the will of the person who owned the land to live there our entire life. And he got old and started getting mean and rather senile. And so we had planned to live there forever. And when it happened, I told your grandfather, I'm not living here with this. And I was ready to come out of the mountains. I was ready to live in a town. And so we moved and we came here to Gridley. And that was right when I retired. And I took a year break of just getting my yard in shape and doing things on a personal basis. And then I started helping with a community garden that the city of Gridley had, was in charge of it for a while. And then a friend of mine, through a garden club that I ended up joining, I'd never been in a garden club ever, so it was kind of interesting. And she was part of the Gridley Lions Club. And she twisted my arm and I joined, and I'm back and forth on whether to stay with them or not. But it does a lot of good work, and that's most of the community service that I do now.
Okay. And why do you feel like community service or giving back is so important?
Well, I've gotten old enough to realize that part of it is a certain amount of satisfaction on a personal level for me. But it truly is one of the core things that I believe in, is that we're not here alone on this earth, and that we come in at times to be with ourselves and to learn to live and to work with other people. And I think that's just part of what's important in life, is if you don't get depressed when you're helping someone else or contributing to your society or moving forward in positive ways. That's my thought about that, has always been that way.
Okay. And how would you describe yourself?
Like, describe myself philosophically?
However you want to interpret it.
People don't believe it, but I really am an introverted person, but I'm very capable of working outside with action. But my preference is to be home, working in the garden, doing my art, involved with family. That is my overall preference. But then, and this is a little whatever, however you want to take this, I've always done types of meditation, and I've always, for years, I don't look at a daily horoscope for astrology, but I use astrology as a pattern of learning. And I happen to have, and this won't mean anything to you, you can look it up. I happen to have 5 major planets and an ascendant in Aquarius. So I'm very civic minded. I'm very politically oriented, although I don't like to be a part of political groups. I know that sounds weird, but it's true. And so I see myself as an artist and a gardener, and someone who cares immensely about everything to do with this existence on Earth.
Okay. And can I ask why you, or in what way you believe in astrology?
Oh, how long do you have?
As long as you want.
um, as I said, I use it as a pattern of growth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't do it constantly, but I have friends that also, of course, are involved with that, and so I look at various patterns in my own horoscope to give me ideas if things are feeling really under distress. Then I will look at it and see what's going on with all the different configurations, and it just kind of helps me focus and move forward and know that all of this is a continuum. It all keeps going, and it's okay for you to accept things with love even when you don't like them. That's kind of what it does for me in a nutshell.
Okay.
So
Gotcha. You've touched on this a little bit, but what are your hobbies?
Oh, fortunately, I have a lot. When you get retired, you need hobbies, or you're not going to be happy. I'm one of those people that there's just not enough time in the day most of the time. But flower gardening is my passion. Then I am right now. I used to paint. I don't paint anymore, but I'm involved in doing pottery. And that is what my artistic outlet is, along with growing flowers. Because the flowers, I always see it as painting with flowers, my garden. So when you come into my yard, there'll be a flow of color, textures, and heights and depths. People don't always realize that other than subconsciously. But it's all there. I plan all of those things.
Okay.
And so it's like painting with flowers.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then the pottery is just, who doesn't like to play in the mud?
Yeah. Okay. And what is a skill that you're currently working on developing, or do you have any?
Well, I'm working on pottery. That is a skill.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working on the skill of really accepting people for who they are without placing judgment on them. It's hard. I have a tendency to judge sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
But the importance of that is so that you can truly meet people wherever your common ground is between each other, and have it be a place of love, and not mushy love, but deep, abiding care and love. And it makes a world of difference. It doesn't mean I like everybody that I interact with. Liking and having this, working on the skill of unconditional love are two different things.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is the differentiator between those?
One is just simply your ego and all the things you've put together in life about what you do like and what you don't like and how much you want to boss people around. And the other has to do with complete and total acceptance that we are all one, and I don't have to change you because you're perfect the way you are.
Okay. What are some things that you are very passionate about as well?
I'm passionate about freedom of choice. I'm passionate that everyone consider other people and their actions. Whether you like what someone is doing or not, that you have consideration and respect for who they are and that they aren't you. those are things right now that are being triggered in me hugely. I mean, I've lived through a lot of different history, and now to see this history coming about at this time that feels, I've been in positions of seeing political danger before, but I'm trying not to get overly involved in the negative, what I see as negative part of what's going on, and make a difference wherever I can. I definitely am a feminist, and I don't want my granddaughter to have fewer rights than I had. And I didn't have that many, in 1969 when I got married. I could not have my own credit card. I could not rent an apartment on my own name. I either had to have my father or my husband. I could not have the utility bill in my name. Nothing. It was against everything that was done at that time. By about 1972, when they tried to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, not equal rights, sometimes I forget all the names, but anyway, the Women's Equality Amendment, which still is sitting out there, not passed. Then women started, that was of course during the beginning of the feminist movement at that time, and the civil rights movement, and it was all at once. And then I could get, like if I wanted a credit card in my name, or I was married at a very young age, so I didn't have to worry about, getting my own place, but I could have. But so say like 3 years after I got married, all of that kicked in. So I saw all of that happen. I experienced it. And I don't want that to happen to young women. I want them to be able to fly and do more. And I want that for young men too, not just young women. But so those are all very important to me.
Okay. And what do you think is your biggest long-term goal and or dream?
When you get older, you have a different approach.
Okay.
I used to have tons of what you see as traditional goals and desires and wants. I really don't have those anymore. I want happiness for my family, kind of real simple things. I am striving to at least have health and strength as I age. So it's real simple stuff. It's a goal of being able to go for walks. I mean, it sounds crazy, but not to become crippled up. I would hope that I don't get senile. My goal is to try to go forth as healthy as possible in life right now. And I'm very accepting of the idea of death. I'm not afraid of it. It's just a part of life. But I really am, and this sounds rather fatalistic, and in our society it's not often stated with honesty, but when you're 75 years old, you might have 25 more years. You might have 30 more years. And maybe in the time things are moving forward, if they don't get disrupted, it could be, I know people regularly that are living healthy lives to 100. Not in a nursing home. They're still in their own homes. They're driving cars. I would like that. And happiness for you and your sister and my kids and my husband, and my friends. I keep it pretty local. I really believe in that idea that you change the world by changing right where you are immediately, and the ripples go out. And that's, I think, my goal is that the ripples are going out.
Okay. So. And What would you say are your core values? You've kind of touched on this a good amount.
Yeah, I hit on quite a few of them. Probably my biggest core value is love in its deepest sense. That you can approach, if you can get there. I don't get there every day. Sometimes I get really far below it. But if you can really reach that core value of such deep caring and love, then you do become one with everybody and the entire. And I kind of been talking about people, but I mean the entire earth, the entire systems, all of these systems. We are not separate from any of these systems. The systems are us.
The systems. And when you're saying that, what are you meaning?
I mean, a system as simply as a rain system of clouds and rain and the wind, the ecology of the earth. Every little microbe under the ground that we are reliant on, even though we don't know it necessarily. One of the things that I like to learn something new pretty much every day and all the time, but I had read a book called The Overstory that I've read a lot of books that are very instrumental in my life, but lately, that one's been several years ago, but in that I learned that like aspen trees, an aspen forest is one tree. And now they're doing research and finding that trees communicate to each other through microbes. And, they're studying this and finding it and seeing it happen where they lend healthy parts of themselves to their sick other trees if they can,
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people go, oh my God, what kind of whatever is that? But I think that is true, that all of these, that we are a part of all of it, an integral part of it. And no matter how many stupid ass things we do, we're still a part of it, So I guess that's a core value. I have a basic, I would call that a core
Okay.
value.
And do you consider yourself to be happy?
Oh, yeah. I do. I've been really fortunate in life. I mean, I've had times that were deep and dark, but I clawed up out of them. And I feel like I've had a really quite wonderful life. I'm a person that has rarely gotten sick, believe it or not. I have allergies now because I live in this farm town surrounded by walnuts, so the air is absolutely filthy. But I didn't have allergies till after I was 70. I've not had any of the aches and pains I have now until after I was 70, and I have friends that have suffered from stuff forever. I've always been physically strong and capable, and I've always had my basic needs met. And when I was younger, sometimes I think I needed more than that, but I know that to have a wonderful warm home and we've organized our life where we don't have what people would consider a lot of money. Excuse me. But we've also organized it to be comfortable. The only thing I would do more now that I just really can't do at this moment in time is I would love to have more resources to travel and do things of that nature. And I know I can't do that. We did some of that when we were younger. We lived on the beach in Mexico for a while. We did adventure things when we were younger with our kids. Lucky them. Actually, they were lucky to get to do it. And now we're in a different situation. And so my husband your grandfather doesn't want to go anywhere anymore. And I just go with friends, little short trips, and do what I can. So,
yeah.
So I feel like I've had a really good life.
That's good. And in a similar vein, or would you say you're proud then of the path that your life has taken?
Proud? Yeah, sometimes I don't think in terms of those types of words. But I guess, yeah, I could consider myself, put it this way. There used to be this other author. I've been influenced a lot by reading books.
Mm-hmm.
His name was Leo Biscaglia. He was very popular, kind of you can do it kind of person in the, I think, 70s, maybe the 80s, I don't remember. And one of the things that I always remember from that book is that live your life with no regrets. When you go to your grave, do not wish you have done something. And so I know that each and every day I do the very best I can. And I could look back and decide to have regrets, but I don't. I knew I did the best I could every single day. And so I guess there's certain pride in that. So.
Okay. What do you think is the purpose of life, or do you think there is one?
I think there's a purpose in life. I actually believe in reincarnation. I believe that we seek to go to higher levels of understanding on a spiritual level, and that everything that we're doing right now in this life is adding to and a part of our pathway. That it that if we're going through distress in the world right now, it's because the entire world is pretty much choosing that, and that I then try to contribute to the part that will help improve that. So yes, I do. I do feel that we're working at. I've never been an atheist, but I've always been just like agnostic.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are some things that you think more people should realize?
That we're all one. And the lesson that I really pounded that home to me in life was back when I first had your Uncle Aaron. We were still living in the city. And the Ethiopian, and probably other famines, I know other famines had happened, but I was becoming more aware. And I remember having the television on, nursing my child, and seeing this Ethiopian mother with she herself starving, her tiny little starving skeletal child all over the TV, and having this immense moment of recognition that we were all one person, that her suffering was my suffering. She loved her child as much as I did, and I had immense privilege and ability to take care for my child, but we were one. And that was always, that image is in my mind, and it influenced a lot of my thinking.
Fascinating. Do you have anything else that you'd like to say to the people of the world, or
to the world? Wow.
To the world, or
that's so funny
that
you say that.
Encapsulates you.
That encapsulates me. Okay, I'll tell you a dream I used to have as a child.
Okay.
Because I think back, it was a repetitive dream that I had when I was probably 8, 9 years old.
Okay, our intermission's over. We're back. So you were telling us about a recurring dream that you used to have?
I think you had asked me, what was it you'd asked me about?
it was the round off question of anything you like to say to the world or any message you'd like to put out there.
This kind of ties up, I think, from a very early age, how I thought in life. And it's stuck with me all these years, but it was a recurring dream. And it was during the Cold War, the beginning of the Cold War. This was the late 50s.
In the real world, or is
yes,
this
in
how
the
your
real
dream
world?
is set?
The Cold War, which most of you younger people maybe read a page in history about, but it was very strong after World War II. I mean, I was born several years after World War II, but in the 50s, Russia and the United States had what was called the Cold War, and it was a big standoff because they both had nuclear power. And it was a very kind of frightening time. It was the time where my generation had to have air raid drills at school and hide under your desk in case an A bomb was dropped, as if that was going to do anything. But anyway, so I had this recurring dream during this time, and the United Nations had become established and was getting stronger and was trying to, and was successfully, with ups and downs, being of a type of peacekeeper. And because I was young and read newspapers every single day, and my mom listened to a type of radio in the Bay Area, because this was when I was in North Oakland, that had lots of news on it. So at a very young age, I was inundated with all of these things that were pretty dramatic and earth-shaking, as far as the atom bomb is going to fall any day type of thing. The cities had air raid shelters that you could go into if the air raid sirens sounded for war. Anyway, so this one recurring dream I had was that I was at the United Nations in New York. And I was a kid. In the dream, I was a kid.
Okay.
Because as kids, I don't think you ever dream yourself as an adult. But, and I would stand in front of the United Nations giving a speech to convince everybody why they needed to care about each other, love one another, and not have war. And this speech would be pretty extensive with all these things that this little 9-year-old kid had read in the newspaper through a kid's lens, And like I said, it was a recurring dream, and it still comes with me once in a while, that I was just so convinced of the real good of the world that it could be changed. And so that's kind of to me, a little picture in a nutshell of how I've always thought about things, and that who I am and what my hopes for the future, all of it in one little thing, was that old dream of changing the world for good, So anyway, that was a recurring dream. I had a much more terrible one, but we won't share that right now.
Okay. And something that you touched on earlier a couple times is your love for books, which is a love that I also share. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about if you could name your 3 favorite books of all time, if you can do that.
Do I have to say books, or can I say authors?
Go for authors and then books. How about that?
Okay, so I'm going to say on the favorite side, authors, favorite. I actually have 4. Okay. I think I have 4. Maybe it's 3. So Toni Morrison, and a woman writer, and a Nobel Peace Prize winner. Margaret Atwood, who is now famous because she wrote the book Handmaid's Tale, which you maybe have heard of, the red nuns with the hoods and all that, many long ago. I've read all of her books. I've read all of Toni Morrison's books. And then the one that just gets thrown in that I highly recommend to everybody to read, and it's interesting reading, anything by Kurt Vonnegut. They're not easy to understand. Some of them are very dated, you know, but he has a lot of powerful things to say, and he says them in really off the wall, weird ways that I just adore. It's hard to explain until you pick one up and start reading it.
Okay. So Kurt, is that with a K or a C?
With a K.
And Vonnegut?
Vonnegut.
Vonnegut. Okay.
Yeah. He has passed, well, all of them except for Margaret Atwood have passed on. They're older authors. I probably could think of more today that I've read and stuff, but with impact, those books that had an impact on me individually, and those are all like novels, you know. I have a couple of nonfiction, one called Magical Child by Joseph Chilton Pearce, and it's sort of a mixture of how human beings works and metaphysics and some other things.
Okay.
And there was a book in the 70s that I really enjoyed, and when I read it, I thought, no, and now I see some of it happening, which was a book called Future Shock by Alvin Toffler, I think, something like that. Mm-hmm. It had a great impact on me. Many books have, and these are just ones that'll come to mind right now. And then a science fiction book by Isaac Asimov called Foundation, which they have now made movies and TV things once upon a time. But the books themselves are, I think, 3. There's more than one book in that series. It's a science fiction taking place in a great galaxy in space, which we all see as common now, you know, because of movies, Star Wars, Star Trek, whatever. But back then, it wasn't that. This would have been one of those. And what he does is he approaches space, science, sociology, politics, and he has these long centuries of time that are tied together by this man who has made predictions and takes you through the rise and fall of different parts of society, how societies start a government, how they start certain social programs, how religion comes in and takes over or whatever, or is then an important part, and how it functions. Anyway, that book is quite dated science-wise in some ways and not so much in others, because you're not going to ever hear a cell phone, or even no one dreamed of personal computers, you know, back then. They dreamed of a lot of stuff, but that one I liked because when I was young and I was seeking knowing, and yet I hadn't gotten much of an education. I was isolated way back with 2 little children, you know, doing my gardening and all of that. It opened up an entire galaxy plus, and it opened up large philosophical ideas in all of these areas for me. I don't know if it would do it for young people today, but it was, and still, I even went ahead and got the first book, Foundation, as a kind of free book on my phone, you know. And I haven't reread it yet, but it was that important to me at one point. And those are the ones I can think of right now. There have been many that had impact on me, but those 3 authors I mentioned, of course, 2 of them are really feminist writers, you know. But, and one is a black writer who wrote about Black women's perspectives, and some of her work is, when I first read it, was very strong and almost brutal at times. But then I'm a, white woman. I hadn't experienced some of those things. So it was eye-opening.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. So those are the ones that, may or may not be something. I think you might, but Kurt Vonnegut is, again, pretty much a type. He's not truly science fiction. He's his own person, And it could be you get to read and you go, what is she talking about? I'm not going to read any more of this.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
And being tucked away, like you said, kind of back in Berry Creek, how did you find out about new authors that were coming out, or
well,
books?
we didn't have the internet back then.
Yeah.
No, I went to the library all the time. Took the kids to the library. We spent hours every week at the library.
Did you have one in Berry Creek, or
did you have to go to Oroville? But they did send up a bookmobile periodically, but that is not the same as going to the library back then. And libraries still function that way for a lot of people. They have, like, I right now don't buy books ever because there's an app called Libby, just like my dog's name.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get a library card, which is easy to do, and you can use this app and you can check out any book you want anywhere for, I think it's a 21-day period of time, fiction, nonfiction, whatever, and you don't ever buy the books.
Oh, good to know.
It's pretty amazing.
Well, there's a good tip for everyone. Libby, search it up.
Yeah, I love it. I was like, never paying any more money for a book.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Grandma, for
You're
your time.
welcome. I would do it any old time.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, as always, and I'll see you next time. Bye.